Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming. It's an enormous treat for me to see Eve again. We haven't seen each other since 2012, when, in slightly similar circumstances, we met in Oxford. I'm incredibly proud to welcome Eve to the LSE. You know who she is, that's why you're here, so I'm not going to say too much about her, but I do want to say a few things. Writer, activist, award winner, inspiration. Eve has changed the lives of hundreds of millions of people around the world, and that's not something one can say about very many people. She's the author, of course, of the Vagina Monologues. She's the originator of V-Day and 1 Billion Rising. Her documentary, City of Joy, is on Netflix right now and is astonishing. Tomorrow evening, this thing you can see on the slide behind us is happening in this very city. And I urge you all, and I'm not doing this at the beginning so that you won't want to go at the end, because I'm going to do it again at the end, but you will want to go and see what happens when art and activism and anti-violence combines to do important things. 1 Billion Rising is the biggest anti-violence mass movement in the world. It started, sorry, can you hear me? Sorry, I should have checked. Can those at the back hear me?
I think they can now.
If the volume goes down, or if I'm facing in the wrong direction, or if you're finding us difficult to catch, wave, shout, throw something at me, not at Eve, we'll fix it. 1 Billion Rising. Does everyone in the room know why it's 1 billion? About a third of the world's population will be affected by violence of some kind, and that violence is gendered. It's against people with fluid gender, but it's mostly against girls and women. Just think about that. That's an astonishing fact, and I checked that information as recently as November with the WHO statistics, which are published every November, and it's stubbornly and still the same. So you need to know about the event tomorrow night. You need to know about 1 Billion Rising. You probably know about V-Day, and you will certainly know about the Vagina Monologues, and you should go see City of Joy, about which we will talk more tonight. When I was preparing for this, I found a list of adjectives that has been used about Eve, and I thought the best introduction I could give her was simply to put those adjectives back together. Eve, you have been called polemical, pornographic, prescriptive, in your face, out there, overly instructive, strident, militant, too political, extreme, controversial, message mongering, which at least alliterates, lewd, crude, and obscene. Congratulations. It's really, really lovely to see you here. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
The shape of the evening is very straightforward. We're going to talk a little bit, or rather, Eve's going to talk a little bit, and I occasionally will prompt or ask. At some point, we would love to open the floor to your questions. So start thinking about the thing you really, really, really would like to ask Eve, and then at the end of those conversations, I'll try and find whatever thread has gone through our conversations. And I wanted to start in the most obvious place, which is City of Joy. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about not only the film, but also the place and what brought you to that project.
Thank you. Well, first of all, Stefan, thanks so much for inviting me here. I had such a wonderful time with him at the Skull Forum, and and it was a very profound experience, our first meeting, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to see so many old friends. I'm thrilled to see my sisters from the Congo, and I'm really happy to talk about City of Joy because I just came here a day ago from City of Joy, and I hadn't been able to be back for 2 years because they weren't issuing visas, and I almost didn't get one this time, but I finally did at the last moment. And I have to say I'm in a state of wonder and I'm wowed. I'm simply wowed by what is happening there right now. I really do believe it is one of the holiest places I've ever been to and one of the most radical places I've ever been to. And it's absolutely miraculous because it's this extraordinary sanctuary and revolutionary center for women who have been raped and tortured and violently and sexually abused in the middle of Bukavu, which at one point was a beautiful town of 50,000 people, and since the war, which has been raging for 14 years, it has now become a place where there are 1 million refugees, all looking for food, looking for shelter, looking for water. So it's a very, very broken, it's a very, very impoverished, it's a very, very chaotic place where there's 1 million people where there should be 50,000. And in the middle of Bukavu, there is this gem, this diamond called City of Joy. And it is just incredible. I mean, really what it's taught me, and I'll go into what it is that if you imagine something in the most despairing situation, the most despairing place, and you put your energy together with your sisters and you say, what if we built this place that the women of Congo have conjured and desired, and we put it in the middle of hell, which essentially Bukavu is to all intents and purposes, what would happen? And what will happen is that there'll be this diamond that begins to shine its light and radiate out and begin to transform everything around it. So I was invited to the Congo, I have to go back, by Dr. Denis Mukwege, who I'm sure many of you know. He is an extraordinary doctor, a gynecologist. I had been invited to interview him in New York by the UN, and the UN had rarely invited me to do anything because the vagina and the V and the U had never met. So I was really shocked that I was being invited to do anything for the UN, and I read it, and then I heard that he was from the Congo, and to be honest, I was very reticent about interviewing him because I knew that the minute I heard about the Congo, Vide would have to get involved in the Congo, and we were already involved in Bosnia and Kosovo and Haiti and Afghanistan, and I didn't know if we had the bandwidth to really open our hearts because we don't like to do anything halfway. And then I read his resume and I was just blown away by what he was doing, and then I met him. And I remembered the first time I met him, his eyes were literally bloodshot from all the horror and atrocities he had been witnessing. And when I interviewed him and I began to hear of what was going on in the Congo, this was 12 years ago, I just was speechless, and he invited me to come, and he just asked me, he said, you can talk about vaginas, you understand vaginas, I'm trying to talk about vaginas being mutilated and destroyed in the country, and if you came, it would really help me and legitimize me, and maybe Vide could help us. And so I went, and I met an extraordinary woman named Christine Schuler-Descriver, who is now the director of City of Joy and the director of Vide Congo, and the coordinator of Congo 1 Billion Rising. And when I first was introduced to her, she didn't want to talk to me at all because she knew that I was somewhat well-known, and she had had it with people who were well-known coming to the Congo, and she was very rude to me and kind of didn't invite me. And then one day she called me out of the blue and told me that 2 children, 2 years old and 3 years old, had been raped, and she was holding them in her arms, and would I come? And I went. And that was really the beginning of, for me, one of the most miraculous journeys of my life. I spent weeks there listening to stories, talking to women, holding women, being with women, And what was clear to me is that, I've been in many war zones. I spent many times listening to rape survivors and listening to the stories. But what was going on in the Congo was something else. It was kind of this synergistic combination of colonialism, racism, capitalism, and insane misogyny that had all come together in this fiery cauldron that was being enacted on women's bodies. And the stories that I was being told, the faces, the bodies. I mean, I was in the Pansy Hospital where there were 200 women, and every single one of them was being operated on or treated for being raped. And he was literally cycling women, thousands of women. It was the end of the world. It felt like I had arrived at what the world was going to look like when capitalism, misogyny, colonialism, and racism finally came to the peak and destroyed us all. And I made a commitment in my heart that Vide's mission was going to be devoted to the women of Congo, that if we were not to stop and address and support and serve the women of Congo, it would spread. And sadly, it has. I mean, if we look at what has happened since 12 years, all the wars and all the rapes that have gone on in all the various countries since then, it's really quite horrific. But when I went, the first time, Christine, who was my translator, and I completely fell in love with each other. It was just like, okay, we are the same fierce, crazy ass, badass women, and we made a decision we were going to go and we were going to interview women and ask them, what do you want? What do you want? What would serve you? And almost every woman we talked to said we need a place where we can be restored, where we can find our dignity, where we can become leaders, where we can heal, and where we can be at peace for at least a minute. Because the incidence of violence, and since then there's rapes and there's rapes and there's rapes. I mean, we're talking about women being raped multiple times in this conflict. And so we decided we were going to open this place called City of Joy, which would be a sanctuary and a revolutionary center that would serve women, helping them turn their pain to power. Now, it may sound like an easy thing to do, but the Congo has no electricity, no water, no roads. So it became this incredibly arduous, just mind-blowing experience even to build City of Joy. And in the middle of it, I got stage 4 uterine cancer and almost died. So it was this insane, wild journey to build it. But I really do believe building City of Joy and my commitment to the women and their praying for me is what kept me alive. I owe my life to the women of Congo. I know that, and to my dear friends who, took care of me. But we did open, and we opened 7 years ago. And how can I describe to you this place? It is what the world would look like if women came into their power, if women were living their lives in the way that their hearts and their souls and their brains truly wanted to live. It is a place of utter cooperation. It is a place of complete sisterhood. It is a place of utter and complete joy. And I'm telling you, I did not know joy. I did not know joy until I went to City of Joy. I didn't know what joy was, because it's a combination of grace, gratitude, resilience, and sisterhood. And it is the highest state of spirituality I've ever experienced, because we're talking about women from the ages of 14 to 30 who have all gone through such horrors. I can't even really talk about their stories publicly without re-traumatizing people, right? I don't even want to talk about their stories anymore, because I feel like that's not what's most important about them. What's most important about them is what they're doing with their stories. And the whole process of City of Joy is moving from victim to survivor to leader. And leader is the critical end point. And it's an amazing process. It's a national program. Women are vetted across the country. Social workers go to the villages. And now our graduates are recruiting the women in each of those towns. So they send us the women they think are most appropriate, who are best candidates. The criteria are that you have to be a survivor, that you have to be committed to being a leader, and you have to be willing to share what you've gotten with your community and make that commitment. Girls come for 6 months. Everything is taken care of, their accommodations, their food, and we have the most extraordinary staff. I don't even call them staff, because we're all part of a movement. We're all part of a story of resurrecting and transforming and lifting up the women of Congo. And the program is brilliant. And I have to say, I've seen a lot of programs that work on trauma. I have never seen anything as effective as City of Joy. One of the reasons is that women come for 6 months. And think about it, for those of you who are survivors in the audience, if you had 6 months where people nurtured you, loved you, where you went through collective therapy every day, where you were taught your rights, where you danced, where you healed, where you had massage, where you had oils, where you worked out, where you sat in meditation huts, where you learned self-defense. The programs are utterly brilliant, and then at the end of the 6 months you graduate and you go back to your community and you spread what you've learned. And we have a very, very tight network of women after they leave. Everyone's in touch. We are building a network, and in a year from now we're going to bring all our 1,500 graduates back together, and we're really going to begin the next stages of political organizing where women take back the country. Because these women who have graduated are fierce, they're forming farm collectives, they're leading in their communities, they're becoming nurses, they're going back to school, they're galvanizing their community. And where they were exiled when they came because they were raped and they were stigmatized, and they are now leading their communities. People can't even believe what they look like when they come back, let alone what they know, who they are, their self-esteem, their ability to talk, their ability to, because they're taught their rights, they're taught leadership skills like speaking in public. And so we're now deeply into this, and we're seeing the results. Then, 5 years ago, we had this vision that we would get land and we would create a farm, which will eventually be a cooperative, but right now it's just a farm, where women would go who couldn't go back to their communities because of security issues or because of family issues, and we would create this amazing farm, and we were graciously given the money to buy a 350-hectare farm, which is one of the most beautiful places and plots of land I've ever seen in my life. We have 9 tilapia farms, we have pigs, we have tons of rice that is harvested. We have honey from bees. We have avocados and papayas and pineapples, and now we're growing moringa. And it is astonishing. We're employing 200 workers. We have just given a huge plot of land, which is serving 300 families. All they do is exchange. They work 1 week for the land, and the land is theirs. So 300 families are living freely off that land. And it is extraordinary what is happening. We just finished the housing for 90 women there. So eventually we'll, in the process of building a collective, which will eventually take over as we build up a strategy and as we build up a structure for women to be able to handle that. And I have to say, when I left, the day I left, we were giving raises to all the staff. And in the Congo, and I know the women here know this, there's a panier. It's a beautiful garment that women wear there, and the super wax panniers are like the Mercedes-Benz of panniers, and like you only get a super wax if you're a member of the upper class, right? And it's like if you have a super wax pannier, you are done. And so if you say to a woman in the Congo, what do you want, money or super wax, the answer is the super wax. It's just like no one ever gets the super wax. So we gave out hundreds of super wax to all the farmers, to all the workers, to all our staff. And I have to tell you, I felt like I had just witnessed the coming of the new world. The dancing, the excitement, the self-esteem, the dignity. It was just the gratitude, the grace, the beauty of I think what I've witnessed at City of Joy, and I don't think I've ever witnessed it before, is what happens when a community of women, there are men who work at City of Joy, but even now, graduates in the first class have trained to be guards, so they're part of the protection crew at City of Joy. It's mainly women who work there. It's only women social workers who work there. To see a community of women, mamas, it's like there's a circle of inner mamas, and there's an outer circle of mamas, then a circle outside the mamas, and it's a spiral of love. It's a spiral of love and healing. And when you come there as a woman who's been abused, as a woman who's been abandoned, as a woman who's been forgotten, as a woman who's been exiled with diseases, with illnesses, with bruises, with batters, with memories, you are held, you are nurtured, you are loved back into a new self. And to see women come who are broken with bullet wounds in their head, who have never even known a bathroom because they lived out in the forest or they've been fleeing for years, to see the flowers they become, to see who they walk out of being, is one of the most miraculous things I've ever witnessed. And I can't tell you how privileged I am, how honored I am to be part in any way of this project. You know, to witness the miracle of the Congolese. It is owned by the Congolese, it's determined by the Congolese, it's the only project in Congo where there are no internationals working, there's no one outside the Congo who works there. I've seen a staff of inexperienced professionals become highly professionalized. I've seen women who came there scrawny and broken become full-bodied women, and in the Congo, to be a full-bodied woman is the thing you want to be. I've seen women who have gone from being listless and unable to speak to being major speakers who could rally like of the forces behind them. And I think what it's taught me is that it's sort of simple. It's about love. It's about love. It's about people taking the time to pay attention to people, which is love. And when people are paid attention to, and when people are held, and where people are cared for, and where people are made to believe they have value and worth, they blossom, and they become leaders. And the 6-month period is like 2 months, you get to be a victim, 2 months you get to be a survivor, and the last 2 months you move into leadership. And it's literally, that is the program, and you literally can watch it happening, you know? So I feel, I don't know, I feel like now, after, we always said after 5 years or 6 years, we would begin to create a model that could be scaled up and other places could have City of Joys. And we just bought our OBR coordinators from Africa, from Swaziland and Zimbabwe and Kenya to come and visit. And they were so blown away. They couldn't stop crying. All they did was just walk around weeping and screaming and dancing. And they were like, we want City of Joys in, you know, in Cape Town Flats. We want City of Joys in Zimbabwe. And the idea is that we should be building a City of Joys in London, in places where people are marginalized and unseen and unfelt and unnoticed and untreated. And that's where we are.
Wow. I was just reminded, you mentioned Christine, one of the founders of City of Joy. Those of you who've seen the film will know this. She says at one point, you alluded to this, she said, "I'm done with celebrities. So I'm not interested. I don't want to do that." And what she comes to recognize is that a commitment to co-creation, to being present, to being modest, to love, to all the things that we've just talked about, is what differentiates the helicopter celebrity from the engaged co-creator, and that's clearly something that's happened. You should see the film, by the way. It is an extraordinary thing for those of you who haven't seen it. Eve, you mentioned this kind of unholy quartet of colonialism, misogyny, racism, and capitalism, and I wanted to ask you something about the last of the quartet, because one of the themes of the film is the connection between this extraordinary violence and conflict minerals and capitalism, the extraction of certain minerals that we almost certainly, everyone in the room, has got some in your pocket, because at least some of them, coltan is the thing you probably got in your pocket, comes from these conflicts and is deeply implicated in the structures of violence that the City of Joy, as it were, opposes. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, the war is really an economic war, as most wars are, right? And Congo happens to be one of the wealthiest, richest countries really in the world. It has everything, but it has copper and tin and gold and coltan. And coltan goes into our cell phones, it goes into our iPhones, it goes into our computers, it goes into PlayStations. So it's very, very valuable. And so what happens is the mining companies, and by the way, mining companies who represent all of our companies, whether it's Apple or you can look at the list in the film, the mining companies hire militias. There are proxy militias that work for the mining companies. They go into the villages. They rape the women, or they have fathers rape their daughters, or their sons rape their sisters, or they just destroy the families. The families flee. They take over the mines. It's a systematic use of rape as a way of extracting minerals and getting those villages. So there are many countries who have been implicated in this war, from Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, many surrounding countries, who are also, like, to be honest with you, I went to Kigali and I was utterly shocked to see what Rwanda has become in 2 years. It looks like Paris. It looks like Paris. It is so built up, but where did that money come from? Where did the money come from that went into all the building up of Rwanda? Well, it came from the Congo. And what's really shocking is that you drive from Kigali, which is the cleanest, most astonishing. I mean, really, it's Euro Rwanda, and you cross the border, and you enter a poverty that is unlike any poverty you've ever seen. So it's all there. You know, you can see the booty that has built up Rwanda, and I think what has happened in Congo is it's a pure manifestation of stealing people's indigenous resources. Those resources belong to the Congolese, but they have never belonged to the Congolese. The Congolese have never going back to King Leopold, who came and took the rubber and cut off people's hands and enslaved the Congolese to work for the Belgians, right? So you see this history, ongoing history of the Congolese having every single one of their resources taken. It is the richest resource, and people are starving. There's a lake that could power the sub-Sahara, and there's no electricity. There is more richness in food, but no access because people have fled the forest because of the wars. So you see people who are literally starving, who are destroyed, who are impoverished, who are living in the richest place of the world. Because no one cares about the Congolese. What people care about is the minerals. What people care about is the resources. And I think, to me, this is a pattern that we see across the world. It is not, we can go to the Philippines, we can look across the world to see where this pattern plays out. But it is really, really significant in the Congo because rape has been used as the tool to get to those resources. And we're talking about hundreds and thousands of women have been raped and tortured. And after you as a man have witnessed your wife be raped in front of you or seen your daughter and you've been powerless, it destroys you as a man. It destroys any sense you have of your ability to protection, so you become insane as well. So it has now spread rape into the Congolese culture as well. And to me, this is a dire, dire situation, because when you have rendered people powerless through colonialism, powerless through stealing their resources, powerless through poverty, right? And then you infect them with rape because it is an infection, right? You are talking about a society that is in very desperate straits. And then we don't even want to talk about the leadership of the Congo, because that's a whole other story, but it fits into the pattern of corruption, of people stealing minerals and making bargains with surrounding countries that benefit those individuals rather than benefiting the people of their own country. And to me, I just have to say, I think that the Congolese are some of the most beautiful, generous, gorgeous people on this planet, and what they have been put through by all of us, because if you're holding a cell phone, you were complicit in that war. Where your minerals come from makes you part of that story. There's no separation anymore in the world. You know, all those resources channeling into our luxuries and our pleasures makes us the beneficiaries. So I feel like we all need to do much deeper examining of where our phones come from, where minerals come from, what are the problem with coltan is very hard to track it because it's very non-transparent. It's very shimmering and it disappears and it's easily transported. But we know the companies now who are using those minerals. They're all documented in the film. You can write to them. You can ask them, where are their minerals coming? What are they doing about all the violence that is attached to extracting those minerals?
You've been engaged. You've created and been engaged with this movement or these movements for at least 20 years. You're behind the biggest mass action to end violence against women, gendered violence. Is it? But the problem is still manifest.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it's possible for you to have a view about whether you think there has been progress, which could be true if we were more sensitive to this and reported on it more, or whether you think we haven't made progress and this has not diminished despite your efforts and the efforts of others.
It's really hard to tell if we've made progress, because 20 years ago, women weren't reporting. Women are now reporting. So I think statistics are much higher because now more women are reporting. I think it's such a weird question, progress, right? What is progress? I think about it a lot. Here's what I think has changed. I think 20 years ago, no one said the word vagina. No one talked about what was happening to their bodies. No one felt that they had a right to speak out about it. We certainly wouldn't have seen women cornering Ted Cruz in the middle of a restaurant screaming at him, "Believe survivors," 20 years ago, as happened today in Washington. We wouldn't have seen thousands of women sitting in the Capitol getting arrested and screaming about we wouldn't have seen this mad right of women telling their stories and speaking out in masses as has been happening in the last year. So we know that there is change in the sense that women feel a right to speak out, women feel a right to tell their stories, women are, we see mass movements in 1 Billion Rising. I mean, 22 states in India rose this year. We're seeing across the Philippines, every part of the country, we're seeing 130 risings in Germany. We're seeing more women, more men joining and speaking out. Patriarchy is a mother blank, okay? It is intractable. It is persistent. It is a virus. And the thing about viruses is, once you begin, you get it over here, it morphs into something over there, right? You think you've got it, and then it shows up like this, right? And I think whether we made progress or not, I try not to think about it anymore because it's where I get depressed. Do you know what I mean? The bottom line is we have to keep fighting whether we've made progress or not. That's it. It's like that thing of ROI, what's your return of investment? The return of investment is we're doing everything we can to make life equal and fair and safe and good for women, period. And we're going to fight that fight until we have to. The problem is men, and I'm just going to be blunt. The problem is men. And I say this in all kindness to the men sitting here, and I thank you for being here. Violence against women has never been a woman's issue. We don't rape ourselves, okay? It turns out we don't. It's always been a men's issue. But women took it on because men weren't doing anything about it. We're generous like that. We fill in the gaps when it isn't being done. We clean up the mess when no one's cleaning it up. If men do not make the dismantling of patriarchy their priority, ending toxic masculinity their priority, standing up for their mothers and their sisters and their daughters and their wives and their girlfriends, their priority, we will never end violence against women. We will always be in a state of resistance and reaction and cleaning up the messes and having the next rape women being brought in, having the next reproductive laws being discarded and fighting for them to be returned. I mean, I've been around a long time now. I'm 65. I feel like I'm in Groundhog's Day. Over and over, like we get a victory, it gets taken away. We get a victory, it gets taken away. Because men haven't changed. And enough men haven't changed. And the men who, in theory, have changed intellectually are not making this their business to fight for this the way we are fighting for this. And until that trigger gets alarmed in men where they suddenly go, oh my God, why haven't I been fighting to end violence against women? Why aren't I standing up anytime a man says something degrading about a woman, or I hear a story about a man hurting a woman or abusing a woman or harassing? Why aren't I interjecting myself in that to make that? Until that happens, and until men do self-interrogation and self-investigation and look at themselves and look at their story, we will be here forever fighting this. And I have enormous amount of compassion for men. They have been brought up within this patriarchal paradigm, which is more destructive in the end to them than it is to us, because at least we get to keep our hearts. Men's hearts are robbed from the time they are born. They are told not to cry. They are told not to have doubts. They are told that they have to know everything. They are told not to feel weak. They are told not to be tender. We can go down the list of what gets done to men. So I have incredible empathy for men. But what I don't have is sympathy. I do not have sympathy that men have not gotten angry about this. We take care of men, we nurture men, we give to men, we support men, we get behind men, we do all these amazing things for men. Why is there no return for us? Why is there no fight coming back for us? And I don't know the answer to that question because I'm not a man. I cannot figure out what it is that keeps men from standing up and from fighting with us, alongside us, to end this violence and to end patriarchy so we all can believe in equality. Because I'll tell you something, equality will turn the world around. It's domination. It's this paradigm of domination that is not only destroying women, it's destroying the earth. It's created an economy where 0.1% of the people have all the goods and the rest of the people have nothing. It's a dominant mentality. It's a hierarchical mentality. And it would seem to me, if we don't want to perish as a species, that men want to step into that and fight with us to change that. But I can't answer what is that holding men back, except for maybe privilege and power and a lack of curiosity. I don't know what it is. But I think when you have privilege and you have power, I was reading, I don't know if you all know who Jian Ganeshi is, but he was a Canadian radio host who was accused by 22 women of abusing women and doing sadistic acts and violent acts to them, and he lost his post. And he published a piece in the New York Review of Books recently. Why he was given a platform to do that, it's questionable, and I'm happy to say the editor got fired afterwards. But he wrote a piece, and it was the story of Jian Ganeshi. Now, what he talked about was the horrible, horrible year he's been through since he got fired. The loss of his privileges, the loss of his power, being a pariah. We were made to feel sorry for Jian Ganeshi. But within all of that story, was there a moment where Jian Ganeshi owned his stuff? Talked about what he had learned in his time of reflection and self-interrogation, what he had come to in terms of how bad and remorseful he felt about. No, there was none of that. And I thought to myself, okay, is it that men don't understand what sexual violence is because they're in such a privileged position of domination? Is it that they're uncurious about what the acts of violence do to women because it's certainly not one day that it affects your life, it's eternity? I mean, look at Christine Blasey Ford. It's affected her life since she was in high school. She moved 3,000 miles away. She's tried to get it out of her head. She can't be in closed spaces. She probably has issues with intimacy. It's her life. It took her life. 1 billion women's lives have been taken from violence. So what is it that holds men back? What lack of compassion, what lack of curiosity, what lack of care? And I don't know the answer to that, but it is the main question we should be asking on the planet today. Because that trigger does not turn, we will perish as a species. How many women can you destroy? If you destroy enough women, you will destroy life on this planet. And at a certain point, that will happen. You only have to look to the Congo to see the genocide of women, to see the sexual terrorism that's been committed against women, and to see what that's done to an entire community of people, and the impact it's had on the men in that community. Sorry, I'm just in a rage right now. And I'm raging about what's happening in America. I'm just raging. It is an outrage to see senators and people who are representing our government sitting up there talking about literally using the thing of we're just going to plow forward. That's what Mitch McConnell said. We're going to plow. Use that language, rape language, plow forward, whether 3 women have come forward to talk about a predator who might be a Supreme Court justice. Like, is this how we respect women? Is this how we care for women? And these are supposed to be the people who are the highest law of the land. And we have a predator-in-chief as president. We're about to put one in the Supreme Court. And yet we couldn't even keep the one who was determining it because he was a sexual harasser who just got fired 2 days ago. So we now have a world of predators running the United States. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just...
Look, I'm a man and I don't know the answer to your question, but I have another question this, which is, do men ask you how to replicate what you have done for men? Because one way into this conversation might be to say, what would 6 billion rising look like? What would my equivalent of V-Day look like? And so on and so on. And there aren't many people on the planet to whom one might go if one were looking for wisdom. So are you asked a lot? And if not, are there things we collectively could be doing such that you are?
I have to say that over the years, with 1 Billion Rising, many more men have joined the movement. And if you look at the risings and you look at photographs, you see many more men who are rising. That's absolutely happened. So I want to say that. The problem is this. It's not a one-day affair, right? Ending violence against women is a way of life. It's a practice. Ending patriarchy is a practice. It's something you have to do in every single thing you do, and you have to be conscious of it in every way that you are. How you talk to women, how you mansplain, it's looking at your behavior. It's looking how you think of women. It's looking, do you really think of women as your equal? Do you think of women as less than you? Do you really care what women's opinions are? Do you want to bring women forward? Do you want women to thrive? Do you want women to rise? Do you want women to be equal to you in your profession? Do you want them to get paid the same amount? Do you want them to feel good about themselves? It's asking yourself on a regular, daily basis, how am I as a man operating within patriarchy? And is my life committed to dismantling it? Everything I do. How do we dismantle patriarchy? So I think, yes, I think more men are coming in, and I think there are men rising and men beginning to talk to other men and create forums for other men. But what I don't see, like looking at just this new evolution of our movement into the Me Too campaign, I don't see all these men coming forward to talk about what they've learned, what they want to do for women, how they want to make this different, and being public about it, and breaking out of what Tony Porter calls the man box, that place where you are valued by your male peers for being a man, right? Like, you don't ever show that you're really with the women, you don't show you're weak, you don't show you have doubts, like what the male culture has created for men to feel safe within. I think when I was a young feminist and we were all breaking out of patriarchy, we took huge risks. You know, writing a play about vaginas, burning bras, standing up and say, we were called all kinds of names, you heard the names. Men have to be willing to go through the same thing. Men have to be willing to pass through that same gate where people are called sissies, or they're called weak, or they're called whatever they're called. And that's how the world will change. And there have to be at least 10%. Castro always said it takes 10% of the people to have a revolution. If 10% of the men of the world were to rise up and say, we are ready to dismantle patriarchy, the world would change overnight. It would change overnight. So what the question is holding men back from making that move. And only men can answer that question. So, you know, we can push, we can prod, we can stimulate, we can inspire, but somebody's got to give inside the male psyche, inside the male being, that makes that happen.
Yeah. You raised it already, but I wonder if there's something peculiar going on, whether we're living through a peculiar moment. I think this conversation might have been more hopeful if we'd been having it 5 years ago. There is a peculiar combination of things going on, particularly in your country, but I think all over the world. And I wonder if, from your position, you have a sense of why we're in this mess. I mean, that we're in this mess is clear, but do you have any sense of why it seems so extreme at the moment?
I have a couple of theories. Obviously, I think that neoliberal capitalism has kind of reached its peak. I think the fact that we are seeing a world where 0.1% of the population have the wealth and 99% of the people are living in dire poverty is very connected to it. I think that women are beginning to make progress, and we were beginning to come forward, and I think the terror and the pushback is really, really extreme. I think what's being manifested in America is really fascinating, actually, because it doesn't make me as hopeless as other people. I think to see, I've always felt, and I always felt that the predator-in-chief would be elected, and long before he was elected.
You predicted it.
I did. I predicted it, and I said, actually wrote this in The Guardian, that he would be our reckoning. You know, America has a lot of dirty secrets. We have the secrets of what happened to the native people and how colonized they were and how murdered they were and how their traditions and their culture was destroyed. We have the story of slavery, which has never really been unleashed and told in all its form. I spent the summer reading the slave narratives and realized how much has never been told about what happened in slavery. We have a story of rampant misogyny that has run through our history. Trump is the exposer. Trump is the exposer. He exposed it all. He turned it all up and he went, here it is. And I think, in a way, if we can get to the other side of this, where those who are fighting the fight for, Michelle Alexander, in her new piece, she just became a New York Times columnist. She wrote a brilliant piece this week where she was talking about the fact that we have to look at our language and the fact that we're calling ourselves part of the resistance. And that really, in fact, Trump is the resistor. He is resisting the new world, the multi-ethnic, the multicultural, the new reality that is trying to emerge, the feminist, right, the LGBTQIA, the world of freedom, he is the resistance, right? We're not the resistance, he's the resistance. And all those white men who stand behind him and those sad white women who are next to him, those are part of resisting the new world. They don't want this multicultural. They don't want a world that's about sharing and cooperation and spreading the wealth. And so part of, I think, what's happening in America right now is we are literally in a cold, Carl Bernstein today said, we're in a cold civil war. It's all here now. We're here. And unfortunately, we have a baboon at the head who has no capacity to lead anyone out of a paper bag. So what's going to happen is that literally all of us, people, are going to have to find the wisdom and the strength and the love and compassion right now to figure out how we're going to turn this in the right direction. And we have to, because if America implodes, which it's rapidly doing right now, it will be very destructive for the rest of the world. It's not just America that's imploding. It's already having, look around the world. I just was part of a book called Strong Men, where women from, writers from Philippines and Turkey and Soviet Union and all are writing about the rise of strong men. We see them in Hungary, we see them in Turkey, we see them in India, we see them, name a place where, Sweden, my God, the right rising in Sweden. Okay, we are seeing the rise of tyrants, fascists, misogynists, Duterte talking about shooting women in their vaginas, openly saying we'll shoot women in their vaginas, right, if we find them, militants, okay? We're seeing this language, we're seeing this misogyny everywhere. Why is it happening right now? One, because I do believe that feminism was really beginning to have an impact and women were becoming into their rights and women were beginning to understand. And two, because global capitalism has impoverished the world and made it absolutely unlivable so that people can come in and take the spoils and dominate. And I think it's up to all of us right now really to fight with our lives to make sure we do not see a turn to global fascism, because I think we're on the verge of it. And I think we could actually go either way right now. I mean, I think it's up to people to rise. We cannot rely on governments. We cannot rely on institutions. I mean, look at America. What institutions are even functioning right now? I mean, they're barely holding on in the Trump era. It's people, it's lawyers, it's journalists, it's activists that have been keeping America together and keeping it at least in a modicum of way in a direction that feels possible.
In a minute, I'm going to ask you to ask Eve. I'm going to ask you one last question. It's a very short one, easy one, I hope. You spend your life in settings like this. What do you always get asked that you wish you didn't, and what do you never get asked that you wish you did?
I always get asked, how do you keep going? And I hate that question, to be honest with you. Because any activist knows you don't have a choice. It's you know, I think, hi Rada, my dear friend from Croatia just came in. I think, the reason I don't like that question is there's an assumption. I think part of what I think those of us who are older understand is that when you start, you think you're going to get into this for a few years, and you're going to turn the world around, and you're going to end violence, and everyone's going to have food to eat, and then you're 10 years into it, and you're like, oh my God, it's worse than it was before, and then you're 20 years into it, and then you suddenly realize it's your life, right? That this is what you're devoting your life to. And so the answer to that question is, you keep going because you have to keep going. We are going to go until people are free, until people are fed, until people are safe, until people are living in ways that feel livable, right? And the question I wish I was asked is, what is the role of imagination and spirituality and art? Because I think one of the troubles I see in the world right now is that everything's in binaries. You know, we have left and right, we have ideology versus ideology, we have this person against this person, we have this person, and sexuality is based in binaries. I just can't stand binaries. I just can't stand them. I think it's not accurate. We live in complexity. We live in ambiguity. We live in wonder. We live in mystery. We live in the unquestioning wonder of the world. You only have to stand and look up at the stars to realize how little you know about what we're doing here, how we got here, what this world is. And I think the role of art and the role of imagination cannot be underestimated. It is the only thing that is going to get us out of this. If I look at City of Joy, there was a swamp in the middle of a war zone. And a group of women sat down and we imagined with another group of women what could be there. And we pictured what could be there. We pictured a world of joy, and we pictured flowers, and we pictured beautiful vegetation, and we pictured rooms that were safe, and we pictured women dancing. And we just had a glorious time just envisioning this amazing place. And guess what? It happened. And now it's real. And I think so much of our lives are spent resisting the bad, fighting the bad, reacting to the bad, so that we're almost pulled into the darkness of their reality, rather than going, let's create the world we want to live in. Let's create the sensibility we want to feel. Let's be the people we want to be, so that other people are drawn to us because we're loving and we're kind and we're generous and we take care of people and we nurture people and we have time for people and we're patient with people. And I really believe that the next step of our movement is going to be lifting it up to a much more expanded consciousness, where we get out of this and we move out to this. And I think art is the way that happens. It happens through theater and it happens through dance, which is why 1 Billion Rising, I think, has spread. Because it's not about words. It's about body. It's about movement. It's about touch. It's about energy. Energy! So much is about energy. You go to City of Joy and you walk into an energy field. And that energy field tells you you're welcome and you're included and you can feel yourself there and you can feel big there. You can feel alive there. And you don't have to be shrunken into your fearful, terrified self. And I think we, as human beings, have to create that energy wherever we go. Because that energy begins to spawn ideas, and it begins to spawn creativity, and it begins to spawn new projects which allow people to come into it. And somehow the world distrusts the imagination, right? It's always about data, right? It's always about ROIs. It's always about, what are you going to get back? What are you going to prove? Blah, 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 blah. Like, have we progressed? Have we not progressed? That's not the answer. The answer is, how far are we willing to go out of ourselves to include everybody around us? How much are we willing to dance up a new world and a new energy so that everybody feels contained within that energy and safe within that? And that's something each one of us can do, because each one of us has imagination, and each one of us can dream up the new world and what it looks like. Because honestly, what is going to get people away from being racist and hateful and misogynist and mean and insecure is saying, oh wow, look what's going on over there. That is beautiful, that is gorgeous, that feels good, I want that. I don't want that anymore, right? It's an energy field. And I'll tell you one story about that, if I may. Around the City of Joy, there's a tent city. It's very, very impoverished, and people are living in a little mini hell. They're all military wives of soldiers who were abandoned by the government. And for every day that we drove to City of Joy, Mama C and I would look at each other and say, when we get City of Joy set up, we're going to have to address the women who are living in these tents, because there's no way we can feel good driving past them into City of Joy every day. It just feels wrong. So over time, we began to meet with the women, we began to talk to the women, we began to reach out to the women, give them mattresses, give them support, and suddenly they became part of our community. And suddenly they started to love us and love what we were doing. And suddenly they became our protectors and I was there last week, and we gave them all support, and they were dancing and they were singing and they were with us. Now 2 of them are staff members at City of Joy. And I realized that what had happened was that the energy of City of Joy had begun to make a much larger circle. It had begun to spun out into a community and they said no one's ever looked at us when they drove past us. No one's ever seen us. No one's ever made us visible, and now we're real. They were weeping. They were weeping with joy that someone had acknowledged their existence. And that really taught me that if you commit yourself to an imaginative project, it has no boundaries. It has no limitations. It keeps going and going and going. But when you commit yourself to only ideology, where you're forced into a stance and to a position, it's very limited. It has an end. You know what you're going to say, you know what you're going to do, you say, I say, you say, I say, I know what you're going to say. But when we go, let's go up here, we don't know where we're going. And suddenly all these people start coming into your space that didn't know why they're in your space, but they were, it's like the Philippines. Monique once told me this story where women were protesting outside of a factory, and they, rather than marching, they were dancing. And the police officers were so disarmed by the dancing that they started to dance with them because it felt so good, right? And suddenly the enemies suddenly became part of a new story, because enemies switch very quickly. Remember, people become fascist quickly and then they become unfascist quickly. So we know that energy switches. So it's like, how do we create that imaginal energy, and how do we spread it?
Questions? Just put your hand up, tell us who you are, ask your question of Eve. Yeah.
Hi, Eve. So I think that apart from imagination, which is colossal, and it has no end, it's universal. I'd like you to just tell me, in all of the stories that you heard, I think apart from men rising and taking ownership of their own decision making, where you see the role of education, which is fundamental. You talked about universal energy circling, right? Communal energy. Where do you see internal energy, meditation, self-interrogation, psychotherapy, mental health? Mental health is very vastly connected to rape, to violence. And where do you see the role of family? The breaking down of family, the breaking down of family values, the mother telling the son not to cry. The violence isn't just being perpetrated from man to man. The violence is also being perpetrated from woman to man, from mother to son. So could you just talk about, maybe in some of the case studies you've done, the role of education, both within the family and at school, and also, a bit of psychoanalysis, where you see that, or therapy, and also the role of family, because I think all of those are also contributing to this problem.
I think you just answered your question, but no, I think
you've witnessed all of this.
I think I can't say how strongly I believe in education for boys at a young age. How we're bringing up boys in the first 5 years determines everything. It really does. How they see women, how they see themselves, how they see. And I agree with you about mothers. And mothers have been trained in patriarchy the way fathers have been trained in patriarchy. So we see our boy on the playground, and a little boy hits him, and we're like, hit him back, right? As opposed to, let's examine what this is that's happening here, right? Because we're being we're the foot soldiers of patriarchy, right? We've learned how to do that. I think for me, educating boys, sex education, like I can't tell you how much I believe in sex education. And one of the things at City of Joy, which is so miraculous, is we have the best sex education program I've ever seen. Girls draw their vaginas, they know their vaginas, they know how they operate, they know how to give them pleasure, they know what they're doing. First of all, most boys, and this is my basic theory about boys grow up, no one teaches them about sex. No one ever talks to them about what it is, how to do it, what's consent, what's slow. I was talking to a group of Congolese doctors this week, who I love. They're doing an extraordinary project, which is going to have revolutionary effects, where they are studying the connection between sexual trauma and reproductive cancer. And I believe the correlations will be, they interviewed 60 of our women, and 29 of them had uterine cancer, okay? So they're beginning to see that sexual violence is a direct cause, maybe the cause of reproductive cancers. So they're amazing men. So we started talking about sex, just in general, and I started to talk about the fact that boys don't get educated in sex. They don't know what sex is. They don't know how to have sex. They want to prove themselves, and also they have an animal drive, so they want to get their needs met, so they jump on women. Women are like, that's appalling. Women push them off. And then the life of the misery of bad sex begins, right? As opposed to us bringing up boys from a very young age to say sex is one of the greatest, most beautiful, gorgeous things that will happen in your life, and if you learn to go slow, and if you learn to appreciate, and you learn to be invited, and you will have the best sex you've ever had. And the doctors were like this. And the guy was like, I'm getting married, tell me more. Now, these men were in their 30s and 40s, right? And I thought, this is the story. No one's ever talked to men about how to touch women, how to approach women, how to love women. And nobody's talked to women about what gives them pleasure. So you have these two forces meeting each other. Somebody who doesn't know what gives her pleasure, and somebody who's obviously never going to, okay? Boom, okay? So we're going into hell. We're basically going into hell, right? And I can't tell you, when I did the Vagina Monologues, and I'm sorry to say, I'm not sure it's totally changed, how many women told me they had never had good sex, they had never had an orgasm, they never met a man who knew how to touch them in a way which would really turn them on, or who took their time. What were the two words that most women said when I said, if your vagina could talk? Slow down. Over and over and over, slow down. Now, that is fairly simple. That is fairly simple. You could actually say that to a man, could you slow down? But women don't say that because they don't want a man to feel humiliated, they don't want to feel ashamed. So a man thinks he's doing it all great, he's doing it all wrong, no one ever tells it. After a few years you stop having sex because both of you hate it, then you live in misery and contempt for each other because you're not having sex and you're dying. This is the story of marriage, okay? As opposed to actually people from the very beginning. I met this beautiful doctor when I was healing from cancer in Kovalam in India, who was doing Ayurvedic treatment. And he was just a genius about oils and touch. And I said, why couldn't you just do classes for young boys where you bring them in with oils and you teach them how to touch women? And he was like, in India, they will arrest me. And I was like, okay, but you laugh at this. Yeah, I know they will. But the problem with this is, then we wonder why 1 billion women on the planet are being raped and brutalized. We wonder why 90% of men on the planet learn about sex for the first time from pornography, right? That's where they first learn about sex. It has nothing to do with sex. It has to do with some bizarre conjecture in some crazy person's mind about what sex is and what it looks like, right? And so all these distortions exist which create violence, which create domination, which create disturbance, and that's not sexuality. And I think because of our prudishness, we then allow a world of violence, as opposed to saying, let's not be prudish. And so this begins in the family. This begins in the family. Do we teach our boys how to touch girls? Do we teach our boys what consent is? Do we teach our boys about the beauty of sensuality and touch and sex and what it is? No, we don't talk about it. So they go to pornography and they learn it from there. or they go to their boyfriends who like know less about it than they do, but are showing off and pretending they do, right? And I think it's the same with girls. We don't teach them what their vaginas are. We don't teach them to look at themselves and know themselves and respect themselves and know what gives them pleasure and where to touch and how that works. We're all scared to talk about it.
But I think the prudishness also goes into psychoanalysis or psychotherapy or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? That we're not being taught, even our education, how to go inside.
Well, I just want to repeat what she's saying. She's saying we're not taught how to go inside. And
how to be, how to cure our own violence, how to temper ourselves, how to temper our emotions. Why do we come to meditation at 30?
Exactly. Yeah.
Pretty advanced if you come to meditation. You may never get to it.
Yeah.
Why are we getting to these things so late? And very few people are actually doing it.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Taught these things from the ground up because that would really change our understanding of our own needs.
Other voices.
Yeah. Read.
Yes.
Hi, I've just done a Master's in International Development at LSE, and I have loved all of what you've said. Thank you very much for coming. So I want to ask you about when you were talking about the leadership in the Congo and how it's very corrupt, and I can imagine all the sorts of problems that you experience. So I want to hear about those and how, when you were setting up this City of Joy, what you experienced and how you overcame them, and if you've witnessed any change in that governance structures.
Baba, you can speak to that. I think Baba's better to speak to that than I am. That's Baba Tampa, who's one of the great Congolese activists in UK. No, I think you should speak to it, I feel.
I don't know if it's on.
It's one of those really, really tricky questions to answer. Every single person in charge, in power, in Congo has been at one point a warlord responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and so on and so forth. In fact, a couple of years ago, about 7 years ago, there was a peace deal which was being negotiated between a militia gang and the government, which used to be militia gang itself. And one of the warlords responsible for the killing of an entire village came out of the hole where the peace deal was being negotiated and sort of gasping publicly, sort of saying, God, only if I had killed more people I would have been made a general. Because his other friend, who is worse, had been made a general and had only been made a major in the new peace deal. So it goes back to everything which Dada Eve talked about, masculinity, patriarchy. I mean, it's a really, really difficult one, really, really tricky. One of the things I've always said, in the 1960s, after independence, or just before independence, the Congolese people created a type of music, rumba. And I've grown to believe that music was partially created to allow the Congolese people to learn how to love each other again. I mean, if you go back to what Dada you've spoken about again, we talk about slavery. 50% of people sold into slavery came from that part of the world, the Congo Kingdom. Colonization's terrible. Historian says about 11 million were sold into slavery. In a space of 24 years, Leopold, king of the Belgian, killed 10 million Congolese. And then independence, 32 years of the 20th century spent in dictatorship. And then this, I mean, Congo as a country for the past nearly 700 years had never experienced 5 years of durable peace. And you could imagine the impact of all of that on our psyche as people and the way society functions. When you oppress, you try to oppress another person, and men try to oppress women. And But yes, the key problem is definitely men, and our government is responsible. The spokesperson of the government, a former warlord, the Minister of Justice, he's wanted for war crimes. The president himself, it's a complete mess in that sense.
And I just want to say something about that. I think the older I get, and the more time I spend, particularly in Congo, but everywhere where there's been slavery, where there's been colonization, where there's been the desecration of the population, rape, colonization, slavery, go into the cellular DNA of people. It isn't one generation. In the case of Congo, it's been hundreds of years. But America, it was 300 years of slavery. Let's not forget. This goes into the cellular makeup of people and is passed on through generations and generations. And unless there is a real intervention, a serious intervention, which is dedicated and devoted to the cleansing and the healing and the addressing and the discourse around what has been done, how do people heal? It's impossible. We treat everything so lightly, right? We treat everything as if it's just going to magically heal itself when people have been denigrated and defiled and beaten and raped and had their wrists cut off and been whipped and been chained. This is mind-blowing stuff. It goes on and on. And I know for myself, being a survivor of enormous violence and sexual violence, I have spent 60 years of my life, every day, working to recover from that. Every day. I'm talking about every single day of my life, trying to piece myself back together. I come from a white family in a middle-class neighborhood of privilege, and I have been doing that work. So when you're talking about people who have no money, who are living in poverty, who are living in despair, and are going through worse cruelties than that, what are the structures we have to heal people, to allow them to go through a process as a country, as a people, as a culture, as individuals, to heal that? And that has to be something that the world is dedicated to as the point of its existence if the world is going to turn around, as opposed to creating more and more and more atrocities, which we seem to be about on a daily basis.
I'm going to suggest now, since we're almost out of time, that we take anyone who wants to ask a question or make a point. If I can ask you to be brief, pass the microphone around and we'll gather them all up, and then we'll see if Eve can make sense of them.
Good luck.
Who has a hand up?
Somebody back there.
Yeah. So 1, 2, 3. We'll see if we can get those 3 questions as briefly as possible, and then we'll see if Eve can answer them. And I'll see if I can write them down to remember them.
So briefly, I'm Karen. Hello, I'm a lawyer. I'm also a mother of a 2-year-old son, so I liked what you were saying. I haven't seen the documentary, and I would love to, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about the sustainability of the City of Joy. I could hear a little bit in how you were describing it, but whether the counselors are from the Congo, or does it rely on international folks who come in and stay for a while and then leave? I mean, I'm sure you're investing in the sustainability of an organization like that, but yeah, hear more about that.
I was hoping that you could talk about the safety of women who have just been loved and speak up for themselves in communities where they would now be ostracized or punished for it. How do you ensure their protection while they're speaking up for these values?
I think we touched quite a lot on how to involve men more in this conversation, and I think that's the theme that we see sort of going to any event like this. Often there's significantly more women in the crowd than there are men, but it's great to see.
It's great to see so many men here
tonight. I wonder if you've got any stories or tips on how better to involve men in this conversation.
Okay, first question. It's only Congolese who work at the City of Joy. There are no outside people whatsoever. I'm the only, V-Day around the world supports, my role is to find support and money and bring attention when I'm asked. I'm at the service of the women of Congo. I serve, period. But there's no one there who's not Congolese. And in terms of sustainability, I'm really proud to say that City of Joy is now producing most of the food for, V World Farm is producing most of the food for City of Joy. So it's utterly sustainable, and it's employing a lot of people. Security, are you talking about what happens to women when they go home? It's really fascinating. Women who are living in war zone areas where we are moving to V World Farm, and they're not going home, we're protecting them. So they are becoming farmers, and they work on the farm. What's fascinating is, I'll tell you a great story. There was a girl who came, and she'd been exiled from her community because she'd been raped, and her father stopped speaking to her because very often when women are raped, they carry the shame in them. So she came to City of Joy, and when she was 2 months there, her father came to visit her, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He was just blown away. And he was like, this is my daughter, I don't even recognize my daughter. And then at graduation, he came and he stood up and he said, I am so sorry that I exiled my daughter. I can't believe who she's become. She will become the leader of our community, and she has. So what's fascinating is women are going back so empowered and so full of themselves and so clear and so beautiful, and so that they literally, once people see them, they're like, we need you. Come, help our community. We have had no trouble, not one instance, where someone went back to their community and was not embraced and accepted. And the girls who know they can't go back, don't go back, and we bring them to, where there's situations like that. But can I tell you this great story? Do you mind? This is my favorite story of this trip, and I love it so much, and every time I think about it, I cry. Okay, so there's two girls. I'm going to say the names wrong in Congolese, but Situ, what's the name of an older twin and a younger twin? Right, so there's an older twin and a younger twin. Okay, they're in a family, mother and a father, having a beautiful life. The war comes, they get separated. The militias come, they run, the father gets killed, the children stay with the mother, and then through circumstances, the mother gives them away. They get given to different families, and they're separated at 3 years old. One of them has no memory of having a sister, one has a vague memory. They go on completely, in theory, different paths. They go into families where the families at first tell them to forget their brothers and sisters, forget their other family, and then they turn them into servants in those families because they're adopted. They become slaves in those families. Both of them have the exact same experience. Both of them get raped by family members in the new family. Both of them get raped again on the way to school, okay? Both of them get referred to City of Joy. They're on the boat coming to City of Joy, and all the girls on the boat say, oh my God, there's a girl on this boat who looks exactly like you. There's a girl who looks exactly like you on this boat. They meet each other. They haven't seen each other for 15 years, and they are twin sisters. They fall in love. They go through the journey of City of Joy together. They're now at V World Farm, being farmers. They're saving money for a house where they're going to live and get a piece of land, and they vow to each other that they'll never separate from each other again. To me, that is Sisters Rising. I'm telling you this, it is the energy of transfiguration going out into the world that begins to create synchronistic miracles. It's real. It really begins to create these very unbelievable situations where these things happen and you go, that couldn't be happening. That's a miracle. Because it's an energetic thing that starts to happen when you really love at a very high volume. And those girls were adorable. They came in, I interviewed them, they came in with these matching paniers. Their skin was beautiful. They were just glorious. And when one of them would tell her story, the other one would weep. Like, because she had the same story, but she wasn't with her sister when it was happening to her. When the other one told the story, the other one would weep. And then when they got to the good part, it was one of the most beautiful telling, it was like a fairy tale, you know? So I'm sharing that because miracles do happen. And I think if we keep putting out this positive, loving, healing energy into the world, you actually come into the realm of that where it makes miracles possible.
Just very quickly,
how do you bring men in? You get wonderful men like Stefan. Here's what I feel has to happen. I don't know we can do it. Men have to do it, right? We've done a lot. We've done the heavy lifting. We've gotten us here. The men, and I don't want to say good men or bad men because I don't even believe in that distinction. There are men who are awake and there are men who need to be awake. And the men who are awake have to be braver and they have to be bolder and they have to be more energized in their commitment to what we're doing. And whatever that takes, the Stefans of the world, the people who aren't afraid, the people who are able to cry, the people who are able to feel, they have to wake their brothers up. They have to do this work. Because I don't speak men. It's a different language. It is a different language. And I sometimes admire it and I sometimes find it interesting, but I don't speak it, but men speak it. They know how to speak to each other. And I really think that's how it's going to happen, but there has to be a cadre of men. There have to be the initial cadre that go out and do the work.
Thank you. I'm going to try, inadequately, just to pick up two or three of the themes that I think I heard from you and from you. But first, I just wanted to remind you of something that your friend Pat Mitchell emailed me about yesterday, which got wrapped up in your answers to other questions, but I don't want to leave them. Pat said, when you started this 20 years ago, one of the things you said was, I don't want to start another NGO. I want this to end. And my audacious goal is to end violence. And she asks, are we there yet? And quite clearly the bad news is that we're not there yet, but quite clearly the good news is that you haven't stopped. I also read you as saying that you won't stop talking until all women are free. So please don't stop talking. The things I heard tonight are that it is about energy and love and joy and imagination and expanding all of our range of imaginative sympathy. And the thing I heard probably most loudly, and that may be because I speak man, is that it's the men, stupid. That really we should be sitting here talking about a movement called 6 billion rising, okay? Because it's the majority of the problem. So I'm going to end just before thanking everyone by saying that there are tickets available for this.
How many people are coming? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Oh, that is pathetic. We can do better. Come on. It's going to be fun. There's artistic expression and dancing and singing and poetry.
There are tickets available here tonight at the astonishing price of £20.
So raise your hand again. Who's coming? That didn't. Okay, better. We can keep going.
And I wonder whether we could all sponsor or cause a whole bunch of men to go tomorrow night.
That's a great idea.
I will buy tickets for 10 men.
All
if
right.
you provide the men. I'll buy the tickets.
Okay,
Right.
so the men here tonight, do you want to raise your hand who will accept those tickets? That's not a joke. Yay, one.
Okay, I'll buy you a ticket, definitely.
Okay, there's other men. I see a man here. Is that a hand? Yeah, okay.
Okay.
All right, 2 of your tickets are sold.
Normally I would say at this point, stop, it's costing me money, but actually keep going. Right, the really important thing I wanted to say is to thank you, not only for being here, because your life is extraordinary and busy, and as we learnt in the film, you're a celebrity, and celebrities are not to be trusted. So all of those things, but actually to thank you not just for being here tonight, but for all the things that you've done for 20 years. You're not allowed to stop talking. It's too important. Although we speak a different language, I think it is critically important that these conversations keep happening and that they involve as broad a range of people as possible. I want to thank you for being here at all. There are lots of other things you could be doing, but for supporting Eve and this project and for being interesting and engaging and supportive audience. I'd like to thank the LSE and my own institute, the Marshall Institute, for having the imagination to think of private action for public good as encompassing the kinds of things that Eve talked about. I think that would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. I think it is still unimaginable in most elite institutions of higher education in the world. And I think one of the things we're doing is dragging those institutions in this direction. See the film, support the project. We love you,
Can I just say
Eve.
something
We
about you?
absolutely love you.
He is one of the men who is awake. And I really, really want to thank you for really being part of 1 Billion Rising, for putting it on in Oxford, for really, truly being here in this movement.
Thank you.
It means a lot to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.